The night my sister appeared under my porch light, December was doing what December in Ohio always does, punishing people for being outside. I had just killed the engine of my pickup after a 14-hour logistics shift with the National Guard. My whole body felt like someone had wrung it out and left it on a hook. The rain wasn't falling so much as attacking, cold, relentless, the kind that doesn't care about your jacket or your mood or your plans. It seeps into the seams of things, into gravel driveways, into boots, into joints that are already tired from carrying too much for too long. I climbed out, pulled my hood up, and started toward my front door. That's when I noticed the shape under my porch light. My first thought, honestly, was that someone's car had broken down on the street nearby, and they needed a phone. It didn't register immediately. Maybe because my brain was running on fumes and old coffee. Maybe because what I was actually seeing was too far outside the boundaries of what I expected to find at my door on a Tuesday night in winter. Then the shape moved, and I saw the smaller shape pressed against it, and my chest did something complicated. It was my sister Rachel, and tucked against her chest, wrapped inside a thin gray blanket that was already soaked through and doing absolutely nothing useful, was her 3-year-old daughter Sophie. Sophie was wearing those little sneakers with tiny lights built into the soles. Every time she shifted her weight on my porch boards, the lights blinked. Weak little flashes of pink and white in the dark, like something that hadn't yet figured out the situation was serious. Rachel looked at me the moment I stepped into the light. No theatrics, no dramatic collapse, just her eyes, which told me everything before her mouth opened. "Daniel brought her home," she said. Her voice fractured right in the middle of the sentence, like a board splitting under too much weight. "And his mother helped him change the locks." I stood there, rain dripping off my hood, gravel slowly swallowing my boots. I did the math in about 2 seconds, opened the back door of my truck, and said 4 words. "Get in, both of you." Sophie climbed in first because small children haven't learned yet that pride is something you're supposed to protect. Rachel hesitated. I could see the humiliation moving across her face like weather. She was 41 years old. She had spent 15 years constructing a life in the suburbs, school calendars, neighborhood committees, dinner parties, the whole careful architecture of a woman who believed that if you did everything right, things would hold together. And now she was standing outside my rental duplex near the Air Force Base, soaked to the skin, holding a black garbage bag full of whatever she'd grabbed before the door closed behind her. I took the bag from her hand before she could argue. The place I was renting wasn't impressive. Old duplex, drafty windows that rattled when trucks passed, pipes that knocked in the walls like they had opinions. The heat worked about 60% of the time, and I'd made a kind of peace with that, but it was dry. That night, dry was everything. Sophie started crying the second we got inside. Not the loud, performative crying of a child who wants something. The quiet, exhausted kind. The kind that means a person has been holding it together past the point where they should have been allowed to fall apart. I found a towel from the laundry basket, old, worn thin, but clean, and wrapped it around her while she stood in my entryway. Rachel stood near the kitchen table and didn't move. She looked like someone who had been traveling at high speed and the vehicle had just stopped, but her body hadn't caught the message yet. "You hungry, baby?" I asked Sophie. She nodded without looking at me. I found a can of soup in the cabinet, heated it on the stove while rain tapped against the window above the sink, in that steady, indifferent way rain has when it doesn't know it's being dramatic. Rachel sat down at the table, stared at the surface of it. "Tell me what happened," I said. She laughed once, not because anything was funny, because she was using the laugh as a dam. "He said we needed to talk." She pressed both palms flat against the table like she needed to feel something solid. "I thought maybe he was finally going to admit the affair. The one you told me probably wasn't happening." She glanced at me. I didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say. The affair had been going on for a while, apparently. The woman's name was Nicole, 24 years old. She worked at the auto dealership where Daniel handled fleet accounts for his construction business. Rachel had found messages on his phone 2 months earlier, just glimpses, just enough, and Daniel had spent those 2 months convincing her that she was paranoid, that she was imagining things, that the stress of motherhood was making her read situations Incorrectly. Then tonight happened. Rachel had picked Sophie up from daycare, came home, walked into her own kitchen and found Nicole sitting at the table with a glass of wine, using Rachel's glasses, wearing an expression of mild annoyance at being interrupted. And standing at the kitchen counter, holding a spare key like it was perfectly natural, was Daniel's mother, Margaret. That detail turned my stomach, in a way I didn't entirely expect. Margaret had always presented herself as a certain kind of woman: church on Sundays, casseroles for neighbors in distress, Bible verses in her social media captions, soft voice, soft smile, the kind of softness that functions as armor. I had never trusted it completely, and I couldn't have explained exactly why at the time. Some instinct. She told me, Rachel said quietly, that maybe this was God's way of showing me I needed to be a better wife. I looked away for a second, not because I was unmoved, because I didn't trust what my face was doing. What did Daniel say? I asked. Rachel stared at the steam rising from the bowl of soup I'd set in front of her. He said he was tired of living in chaos. That word, chaos, it landed in the room like something that deserved to be thrown back. Rachel had spent 15 years running a household with the precision of a logistics officer: school pickups and drop-offs scheduled to the minute, birthday parties organized weeks in advance, Daniel's doctor appointments, his work calendar, his dry cleaning, his vehicle maintenance schedule. She color-coded the grocery list. She maintained a shared family calendar that was updated in real time. She remembered Sophie's allergy medication every single morning without being asked. Daniel, from what I had witnessed over the years, could not reliably remember his daughter's dietary restrictions when packing her lunch. Chaos. Your bank accounts, I said. Tell me about those. Rachel's eyes came up to meet mine. He emptied the joint checking yesterday. Cards. Cancelled. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. That was the sentence that changed the temperature of everything for me: not the affair, not the lockout, not even the garbage bag of clothes. The bank accounts. Because that wasn't a man in emotional distress making a rash decision. That was a man who had planned. Money first, lock second. Narrative third, make sure everyone in the social circle had a version of events before Rachel could offer her own. This had been assembled deliberately. Outside, thunder moved somewhere over the city. Sophie had curled sideways on my couch, soup bowl balanced carefully in her lap, cartoon animals murmuring softly on the television. Her eyes were already closing. Rachel got up quietly to take the bowl before it spilled. That's when I saw it. Sticking out of the top of the garbage bag, a small stuffed elephant, dirty, soaking wet. One of its ears had been torn nearly off, hanging by a few threads of seam. Rachel followed my eyes. She grabbed it from the lawn, she said, barely above a whisper. He threw some of her things outside. Something went very still in my chest. I'd spent close to 20 years working in military logistics: supply chains, inventory systems, compliance documentation, federal contract oversight, warehouses full of records that had to match to the decimal point because discrepancies had consequences. I understood deeply how much damage a person could cause when they assumed no one was watching their paperwork closely. A few months earlier, Rachel had mentioned something almost in passing: that Daniel's construction company had landed a subcontracting arrangement tied to a federally funded housing development for veterans outside the city. I'd barely registered it at the time. Just contractor shop talk. Now I sat in my drafty kitchen and thought about every complaint Rachel had ever made about the way Daniel ran his business. Expired safety certifications. Workers paid in cash with no documentation. Material invoices that didn't match project timelines. Vendors that seemed to exist mostly on paper. At the time, it had sounded like the ordinary low-grade sloppiness of a small contractor who had been getting away with things for long enough to stop worrying about it. Now it sounded like something else entirely. I looked at Rachel sitting beside her sleeping daughter and made a quiet internal note. Some people look at patients and decide it means the person is harmless. That is, historically, a significant miscalculation. The morning after didn't feel like the beginning of anything. It felt like 3 empty coffee mugs, a table buried under papers, and 2 adults running on inadequate sleep trying to reconstruct the basic architecture of a life. Rachel sat across from me in one of my old sweatshirts, Sophie tucked against her side watching cartoons. Every few minutes, Rachel would pick up her phone, stare at the screen, and put it back down like it was something she'd been warned not to touch. "Don't text him," I said. "I wasn't. You were thinking about it." She looked at me with eyes that were red at the edges. "I need my things, Meg, my clothes. Sophie's things are all still there. You need a lawyer before you need your clothes." It came out blunter than I intended. But I knew Daniel. Men who operated the way he did loved a private conversation. Loved getting a woman alone, making her cry, then emerging from the room to tell mutual friends that she was unstable, that she'd been irrational, that he'd tried his best. I'd watched him do it at dinner parties. Tiny versions of it. The charm that flickers on and off like a switch. So I started with the procedural things. I called Sophie's daycare and informed them that Daniel was not authorized to pick her up until Rachel provided written permission directly to the facility. Then I helped Rachel freeze one of her personal cards, request a replacement, and audit what remained in a small personal savings account Daniel hadn't touched yet. We photographed everything. Sophie's wet sneakers, the soaked blanket, the garbage bag, the stuffed elephant with its damaged ear. Rachel hated every second of it. "This feels awful," she said, "taking pictures of all this." "It is awful," I told her. "We're just making a record of who created it." By noon, we were in the waiting area of a legal aid office in the city. A vending machine hummed in the corner. Sophie sat on Rachel's knee eating crackers from a small bag, watching people come and go with the wide, calm attention of a child who has accepted that adults do strange things. The attorney who came out to meet us was a woman named Carol. Silver hair, reading glasses on a chain, the kind of steady measured voice that comes from spending years hearing the worst of what people do to each other and continuing to show up. She walked Rachel through what to preserve. Text messages, financial records, social media posts, the names of anyone who witnessed the lockout, any documentation of the existing living situation. Then she said something that made Rachel go very quiet. "Right now, shame is not your friend. Do not let it make you polite." I wrote that down on the back of a receipt from my glove compartment, not because I'd forget it, but because it deserved to exist somewhere physical. The first week was pure logistics of the unglamorous variety. I drove Sophie to preschool before my shift. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home. I slept badly and woke up tired and went back to the base and did my job and came home and did it again. My truck started making a grinding sound when I shifted into reverse that I absolutely did not have the financial bandwidth to address, which felt cosmically appropriate. One night I found Rachel in my laundry room, crying into a basket of folded towels. Not loudly, just the quiet, continuous kind. "I'm destroying your life," she said. I leaned against the dryer and let myself be honest for a moment. I was tired, deeply tired. The kind of tired where your skeleton feels hollow. I had inventory discrepancies at the armory. My commanding officer had asked me twice in 1 week if I was getting enough sleep. Sophie woke up twice a night calling for a room that wasn't there anymore, and each time it took 20 minutes to settle her back down. But Rachel had not done any of that. "You didn't create this," I told her. "Daniel brought it here, there's a difference." She shook her head. "I should have left 2 years ago, I knew. I kept finding reasons not to." "You saw it," I said. "You just kept hoping you were reading it wrong." That made her cry harder, which wasn't what I'd aimed for. But sometimes accurate things land poorly before they settle. Daniel started his public performance on the 3rd day. His first post went up around mid-morning. Something about protecting your peace and making hard choices. Careful language. The kind of phrasing that could mean anything and therefore couldn't be directly challenged. Margaret commented beneath it with a small red heart and a scripture passage about truth. By evening, 3 women from Rachel's church community had sent messages asking if she was okay. In that particular tone people use when they've already received a version of events from someone else, and are essentially checking whether the subject will confirm or contradict it. Then Margaret posted something about a godly household being incompatible with disrespect. Rachel wanted to reply. Her thumbs were ready. "Don't," I said. "She's lying about me." "I know. She's making me look like I walked out on my family." "I know. So why do they get to just say whatever they want?" I took the phone out of her hands gently. "Because people who talk that loudly leave tracks. Let them." That was something I had absorbed over years of watching how people behave when they think the documentation isn't happening. Arrogant people record themselves. Angry people say too much. Careless people forget that screenshots are permanent. We were saving everything. Daniel kept performing. He told a neighbor that Rachel had experienced some kind of breakdown. He told a friend from the contractor network that she'd become difficult to live with. He told someone at church that he was focused on providing Sophie with a stable environment. That word stable sat in my chest like a splinter. The night I heard it, I waited until Sophie was asleep, opened my laptop at the kitchen table, and began composing something that was not emotional, not anonymous, and not dramatic. Just a formal account of what I knew about Daniel's construction company's subcontracting work. Specific details. Dollar amounts where I had them. Project codes. Vendor names that appeared on invoices but were difficult to verify as functioning businesses. Workers listed under one company's payroll, appearing on-site with another company's credentials. I had not witnessed these things personally. Rachel had. Over 15 years of managing a household with a man who sometimes forgot to close browser windows or left paperwork on the kitchen counter because he'd stopped thinking of her as someone paying attention. I didn't accuse him of anything I couldn't support with specifics. I simply directed the relevant people toward the relevant records. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed. Nothing happened for 10 days. Daniel posted a photo of himself at a breakfast event, grinning next to a man in an expensive jacket. Nicole appeared in the background of another photo wearing sunglasses indoors, which told me something about her relationship with self-awareness. Meanwhile, Rachel was folding the same pile of laundry 3 times. She was checking her phone at midnight. She asked once, very quietly, whether she should just call Daniel and try to talk. "I know how that sounds," she said. "We were at the stove, boxed pasta, because we were both too depleted for anything that required actual cooking." "It sounds human," I said. She looked at me, surprised. "I still love him," she said. "Not the person he turned out to be, the person I thought he was." I kept stirring, didn't say anything for a moment. I had judged her for not leaving sooner. I can say that now and mean it as an admission, not a defense. I had thought that love, at a certain point, should have limits, that it should recognize betrayal and step back. But that's not how it works for everyone. Sometimes love becomes the reason a person keeps rewriting the evidence. It doesn't make them foolish. It makes them human in a way that leaves them exposed. Then came the education account. Rachel found it on a Thursday. Sophie had a small savings account, accumulated birthday money, holiday checks, the modest monthly deposits Rachel made whenever there was any margin left after the household expenses. It was never a large amount. It was the kind of account you build quietly over years because you believe the future is worth preparing for. Daniel had cleaned it out 6 months earlier. Rachel sat at my kitchen table staring at the transaction history on her phone. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was completely flat. "He took her money." Not angry, not crying, just finished. That tone scared me more than either of those would have. I stood behind her and looked at the screen. The last of whatever I had been carefully maintaining inside myself, some deliberate softness, some restraint I'd been exercising, went quiet. Not gone, just quiet. Rachel put one hand over her mouth. "I keep thinking I must have been stupid," she said. I pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. "You weren't stupid, you were trusting. He built his whole strategy on that." For the first time since the night she showed up on my porch, Rachel stopped apologizing. She closed the phone, wiped her face with the back of her hand, looked at me directly. "Tell me what comes next." That was the moment I understood something had shifted. Not in Daniel's world, not yet. In her. Nicole began posting videos from Rachel's house, about 2 weeks after the lockout. Not subtle ones. Short clips with pop country playing softly in the background while she moved through the rooms like she was doing a slow tour, making coffee in the kitchen, carrying a wine glass through the living room in a way that managed to be both casual and theatrical. One afternoon, Rachel froze in the middle of folding laundry. "That's my robe," she said. I looked at the phone she was holding out. Nicole was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, wearing a soft gray robe with small floral details near the cuff, something Rachel had owned for years, worn down to comfortable softness. It wasn't even the robe itself. It was the expression on Nicole's face. That absolute ease, the look of someone who had stepped into someone else's life and found it fit well enough. Rachel handed me the phone without a word and elked into the bathroom. A minute later I could hear her crying through the door, controlled, trying not to let Sophie hear. I wanted to hate Nicole entirely. I gave it a genuine attempt. She was young and loud online, and seemed to be operating under the impression that attention and happiness were interchangeable. But mostly, what I felt was frustration at the way she kept reopening things Rachel was barely managing to close. Then she contacted me. Not Rachel, me. It was close to 11 at night. I was at the kitchen table with overdue bills spread around me and a calculator I kept hoping would give me a different answer. My phone buzzed. A message from Nicole's account. "I need to talk to you, not Rachel, you." I stared at it for a full minute. Then I typed back, "Wrong person." Her reply came almost immediately. "He's been lying to me too, and he put my name on some paperwork I didn't know about. I think I'm in trouble." I set the phone down, listened to the refrigerator hum. Rain again. Ohio had apparently committed to one mode for the winter. Then I picked the phone back up. "Where and when?" We met the next afternoon at a coffee shop. I told Rachel I had errands. That was probably a mistake, but I needed information more than I needed to have a principled conversation about the ethics of the situation. Nicole was already there when I arrived. No makeup, hair in a loose knot, an oversized sweatshirt and an expression of controlled anxiety. She looked younger in person, not dangerous, not calculating, just immature. The version of a person who had believed a convenient story because believing it required less courage than not believing it. "You probably think I'm a terrible person," she said before I'd even fully sat down. "I don't think about you that much," I said. "What paperwork?" She pulled out her phone, unlocked a folder. Invoices, screenshots of text messages, photographs of documents she'd apparently taken inside Daniel's truck. At first scan it looked like ordinary contractor disorganization. But the longer I looked, the worse it got. Money had been moved between project accounts in ways that didn't track with the work being documented. Several invoices listed vendors whose addresses, when I checked them later, didn't appear to correspond to operating businesses. And a number of documents, including ones tied to the veterans' housing subcontract, had Nicole's name and home address on them. Not as an employee, just listed. "He said it was temporary," she said, "for tax purposes, that it was just a technical thing." I kept my face completely neutral. "Did you sign anything?" "No." "Good." She swallowed. Am I going to be in legal trouble? Honestly, I didn't know. What I did know was that Daniel had become less careful in recent months. Men who start winning in one arena, public image, social narrative, the performance of normalcy, often stop believing that other arenas are still in play. Nicole kept talking. Daniel had told her Rachel was emotionally fragile and had been for years, that he stayed in the marriage out of guilt over Sophie, that he'd been planning to leave for a long time but didn't know how to do it cleanly. Every piece of it was the exact script that every version of this story uses. "He also told me," Nicole said carefully, "that you had some kind of obsessive control over Rachel, that you'd been working against the marriage for years." I picked up my coffee cup. "That man deploys the phrase, emotionally unstable, like it comes in a subscription box, I said. For the first time, Nicole almost smiled. Then she showed me something that made the room go very quiet. A text message from Margaret. The screenshot showed Margaret's number and a message that read, "Move the funds through the church community account first. People don't scrutinize that kind of transfer the way they scrutinize business accounts." I read it twice. Then I put my coffee down and looked out the window for a moment. Margaret, who delivered meals to sick neighbors, who never missed a Sunday, who had stood in Rachel's kitchen holding a spare key while her son dismantled his family and called it liberation. Not just defending him, actively assisting. I drove home in a mood that I will describe as purposeful rather than emotional, though the distinction was probably thinner than I'd like to admit. Rachel was at the kitchen table with Sophie coloring. The second Rachel saw my face, she went still. "What happened?" I set my keys on the counter. I met with Nicole. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a sentence, landing somewhere it causes damage. Rachel stared at me. "You what?" She came forward on her own. She has documentation. "You sat down with her. In a restaurant. You had coffee with the woman who is currently living in my house and wearing my robe. And your house might still be your house, if we use what she gave me correctly." Sophie looked up from her coloring, sensing the temperature Chan. "Jay." Rachel lowered her voice. "You don't get to decide which betrayal matters less." That hit, because she was right. I had made a unilateral decision based on strategic logic and hadn't stopped to consider that Rachel didn't have the luxury of treating her husband's affair as a resource to be managed. "I'm trying to protect you," I said. "You know what the worst part is?" Rachel's voice was quiet, controlled. "She probably knows more about the man I was married to than I do at this point." She walked into the bedroom and closed the door. Not a slam, just a soft, final click. Soft hurt is usually the kind that stays. That night, after Sophie was asleep, I sat in my living room with Nicole's screenshots spread across the coffee table. An old game show played muted on the TV, and I thought about the architecture of a person like Daniel, not just the marriage, but the whole structure. The business, the contracts, the relationships, all of it built on the same principle: confidence plus carelessness plus the assumption that no one is paying close enough attention. Everyone runs out of road eventually. January arrived, and with it the particular administrative cruelty of official paperwork. The custody filing appeared on a Thursday in a white envelope that looked too innocent for its contents. Rachel opened it at the kitchen table while Sophie drew snowmen beside her. She read it in silence for a while, then handed it to me without comment. Daniel was petitioning for partial custody. The supporting documentation described Rachel as emotionally volatile, financially irresponsible, and operating under undue influence from an aggressive family member with a confrontational disposition. That aggressive family member was me. I almost laughed, then I didn't. "He threw his daughter into the rain," I said. "He wants to hurt me," Rachel said. "He wants control back," I told her. "There's a difference. Men like him don't panic when you leave, they panic when you stop needing their version of what happened." The hearings began in the downtown courthouse 2 weeks later. Family court looked nothing like it does in movies or television. No dramatic speeches, no moment of thunderclap revelation, just fluorescent lighting, plastic chairs, vending machines with half the selections sold out, and the low hum of institutional anxiety. We arrived before the sun was fully up because our attorney had warned us about parking. Snow from the previous night had been compressed by traffic into gray ridges along the sidewalk. The coffee from the courthouse lobby machine tasted like hot water with coffee's distant memory. Daniel arrived 20 minutes after us in a dark coat, moving through the lobby like a man with appointments rather than consequences. Margaret walked half a step behind him, leather Bible pressed to her chest. Nicole stepped out of his vehicle a few seconds later in oversized sunglasses, despite the fact that the sky looked like a gray flannel sheet. I watched Rachel see her. She drew one slow breath through her nose, then looked away. That small act cost her something. I know because I watched her pay it. Inside the courtroom, Daniel's attorney was a man named Warren Price. Polished, experienced, the kind of practiced calm that comes from decades of standing in rooms like this one and winning. He looked at me once with the professional approximation of a smile that is worse than no smile at all. The hearing itself was an education in patience as a survival strategy. Daniel spoke about stability. Margaret dabbed at the corners of her eyes on a schedule that suggested rehearsal. Rachel sat beside me and methodically shredded a tissue in her lap. Then Daniel said something about being concerned for the emotional environment his daughter was being raised in. I felt every muscle in my jaw contract simultaneously. Our attorney's hand appeared on my sleeve, light as paper. She didn't look at me. The message was entirely in the contact. Don't. So I didn't. I sat there while people I didn't respect organized my sister's life into neat judicial categories. Military training builds a very specific kind of response to crisis. Assess, act, protect. It is designed for situations where movement is the answer. Family court punishes that instinct, especially in women whose professional identity involves discipline and authority. One wrong sentence, and suddenly the word aggressive is in the room and it never fully leaves. I looked at the ceiling a lot. The judge approved temporary supervised visitation and adjourned. Daniel looked relieved. Rachel looked like a person who had been carefully taking apart and reassembling herself for months, and had just been handed one more reason to have to do it again. Outside, she said, he lies and the system just treats it like one perspective. Our attorney sighed. The court is trying to be careful because a child is involved. The child, Rachel said quietly, has already been involved for months. That sentence followed me out of the building. In the parking structure, someone called my name, my rank actually. I turned around. Warren Price was standing a few feet away, gloves in his hand, looking less like an attorney and more like a tired man in an expensive coat. He looked at Rachel briefly. I'm not here about the case. Then what? I asked. You handled logistics compliance work during certain contract periods. Guard-related. I waited. I handled some of the same cases from a different angle, earlier in my career. He paused. Your brother-in-law has problems developing that go beyond this courtroom. I'd suggest you not become any more emotionally involved in that situation than you already are. Rachel looked between us, confused. I crossed my arms. Is that a threat? Practical observation, he said, and walked away. It bothered me for days after, not because it sounded like protection. It didn't. It sounded like a man describing something already in motion. The tone of someone watching an accident happen in slow speed who has concluded that the outcome is fixed. The weeks after that were the hardest to describe because they had no shape. Court dates moved. Paperwork accumulated. Rachel cried less, but she also laughed less, which felt like the worst measurement. I snapped at a junior soldier over mislabeled supply containers and spent the rest of the day feeling bad about it. My commanding officer pulled me aside after drill weekend and asked if things were okay at home in that careful way commanding officers do when they've already decided they're worried, but need to offer you the chance to confirm it yourself. I realized I was leaking. Then came the afternoon in the parking structure. A supervised visit had ended with Sophie crying because Daniel had told her she was going home with him today, and when she couldn't understand why she wasn't, the whole afternoon fell apart. Rachel got her buckled into the car seat while snow drifted through the concrete levels of the structure. Then Sophie's voice came from the back seat, very small and very serious. Mommy, did Daddy forget about me? I will not try to describe the sound Rachel made. Some sounds don't belong in language. Just pain, leaving someone all at once, in a parking structure in winter. I got into the back seat, next to Sophie, and let Rachel have a moment at the wheel. And sitting there, with a 3-year-old looking at me with that calm, watching expression children get when they sense the world is behaving strangely, I understood something about the nature of this whole situation that I hadn't wanted to understand before. Even when things go correctly, some of the damage is permanent. It doesn't matter how justified your response is. The event already happened. The moment Sophie asked that question, that's already in her somewhere. That doesn't unhappen. That night I sat at the kitchen table alone with a legal pad. At the top, I wrote 4 words: do this correctly, carefully. Underneath, 4 more: do not become him. March came and the ice started pulling back from parking lots and windowsills. The world made a show of softening. We didn't feel it yet, but we could see it happening, which was something. Daniel's situation was beginning to generate its own gravity by then. Not loudly, there were no announcements. But his company lost a subcontract without explanation. A supplier filed a payment dispute. Rumors moved through the contractor community and the church community simultaneously, which in certain Midwestern cities amounts to the same community. Daniel kept performing normal. That's the thing about people who have built their lives on performance. They keep believing the performance can outlast the facts. The Veterans Charity Banquet happened on a Friday night in a downtown hotel that smelled like carpet cleaner and convention. Laura, our legal aid attorney, had gotten Rachel an invitation through a support network for military and veteran families months earlier. The idea was to give Rachel something that existed outside the wreckage, a room full of people who weren't defined by Daniel's story. Rachel almost canceled when she found out Daniel's company had sponsored one of the tables. "I can't be in the same room with him," she told me. She was standing in the hallway holding earrings she wasn't going to wear. "I'm too empty." I straightened my jacket and looked at her. "We're not going there for him." She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "He's everywhere, Meg. Everything I do, he's already been there." I stepped closer. "Then let him be everywhere. We're walking in anyway." The ballroom was exactly what those rooms always are. Round tables with white linens, small desserts no one eats, little flags near the stage. Veterans in old dress uniforms standing in clusters talking at a volume that suggested they'd each had 1 drink more than they'd intended. For the first hour it was almost peaceful. Rachel smiled, a real one, while talking with an older couple near the back of the room. Sophie was at home with a trusted sitter. Thank God. That child had witnessed enough adult behavior for 1 year. Then Daniel walked in. Dark suit, lapel pin, that smile. The one that said I am a good man and I would like credit for it. Margaret floated beside him in pearls, carrying herself with the particular bearing of a woman who believes that righteousness is visible from the outside if you hold it correctly. And approximately 10 feet behind them, alone, came Nicole. Not with Daniel, alone. Interesting. Rachel went rigid beside me. I could feel it. "Okay," I asked quietly. "No," she said, "but I'm still standing." I don't think she knew how much weight that sentence carried. Daniel spotted us near the coffee station. For just half a second, maybe less, something real moved across his face. Then the charm layer deployed back over it, and he walked toward us like a man who had decided that confidence is a kind of magic. "Rachel," he said, like they'd run into each other somewhere neutral, "you look good." Rachel said nothing. He looked at me, I nodded once. "Didn't expect to see either of you tonight," he said. "That makes 3 of us," I replied. Margaret materialized beside him with her soft church voice. "Let's all agree to behave tonight, for everyone's sake." I looked at her directly. "You helped lock your granddaughter out of her home in the rain." Her smile stopped. Then Nicole approached from behind them, both hands around a glass of water like she needed something to hold. Daniel's expression shifted. "Nicole," he said, sharp and low. "I'm not here for you," she said. That was the moment I noticed the 2 men near the side entrance. Dark suits. Folders. A woman with them wearing a project compliance badge on a lanyard. They weren't police. No drama in their bearing. Just the particular calm of people who do administrative work and have learned to be patient about it. Daniel saw them at the same moment I did. For the first time in my experience of him, I watched the confidence leave his face completely. Not gradually, all at once. The older of the 2 men approached. "Mr. Calloway, we need a few minutes." Daniel's smile came back automatic. "Of course, I'm sure this can wait until." It won't take long. The conversations nearest to us had started to slow. Daniel looked at the two men, then at the compliance officer, then finally, fatally, directly at me. You, he said, not a question, and too loudly. Several people nearby turned. Did what? I said. This, he gestured widely, voice climbing. All of this. You have been working against my family since the beginning. You couldn't stand watching Rachel and me build something, so you. Fix something, Rachel said it quietly, but the room heard it. Daniel was unraveling now in the specific way that people do when they've been performing for too long, and the audience has changed. You've always acted superior because of that uniform, he said, pointing at me. You think that gives you the right to interfere in people's lives. Near the stage, several veterans had turned fully in their seats, not in agreement, in the way people turn when someone is doing something embarrassing. The older investigator said, Sir, if we could step somewhere. Margaret grabbed Daniel's arm. Lower your voice, she hissed. And then, in the worst possible sequence of words she could have chosen, that money was meant to support the outreach program. You told me no one would scrutinize transfers through a charitable account. The room went the kind of quiet that doesn't happen on television, because television can't quite capture it. The specific silence of a large room where everyone has simultaneously stopped pretending not to listen. The younger investigator looked at Margaret. Excuse me, ma'am, could you repeat that? The color evacuated Margaret's face in one clean wave. Daniel turned toward his mother with an expression I won't forget. And then Nicole, who had been standing to the side holding her glass of water and absorbing all of it, finally broke. He put my name on invoices, she said, to the room as much as anyone. He told me it was administrative. He said it was temporary. Daniel rounded on her. The sentence he started was the wrong one. The first word alone was the wrong word. Rachel said his name. Not loudly, not with drama, just clearly in a voice that cut straight across the room. Everyone looked at her. She stood up slowly. I spent years, she said, still quiet, convincing myself that if I loved you enough, at some point you'd love us back the same way. Daniel opened his mouth. Whatever he was assembling, some version of the performance, some recalibration, Rachel didn't wait for it. Tell me why, she said. He looked at her, and then, whether it was panic or arrogance or some combination of the two that had been building in him foe. Our months, he said the thing that could not be unsaid. Because I knew it would hurt you, he said. That's why I pushed for custody, not for Sophie. The room received this the way rooms receive confessions, with a stillness so complete you could hear the ice shifting in glasses. One of the veterans near the stage said something under his breath. Daniel understood, a full second too late, what he had just done. Rachel's face went through something I watched in real time. Not triumphant, not theatrical. Just done. Completely and finally done. The face of a person who has been waiting for something and just understood it, was never going to arrive in the form she had been waiting for, and somehow that's both devastating and freeing at once. She picked up her coat. I stood up beside her. We walked out. The rain had started again outside. Cincinnati in March doing what it does. Rachel stopped under the hotel awning and let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep. I kept waiting for him to just tell the truth, she said. Headlights passed on the wet street. For him to just say it. I stood beside her and looked back through the glass doors. Daniel stood in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by people who no longer looked like they were on his side. You weren't waiting for his confession, I told her. You needed everyone else to stop pretending they couldn't see it. For the first time in months, she nodded without her eyes filling. 8 months after the night Rachel appeared on my porch in the rain, life stopped being entirely about survival. Not better, just steadier. I've learned that's a different thing and a real one. Rachel found a 2-bedroom apartment across town above a dental office. The carpet had seen better decades. The kitchen drawers swelled when the weather turned humid. But it was clean and it was quiet, And this was the thing that mattered most: nobody inside it constructed reality to serve themselves. Sophie got her own room. She picked the wall color. She stuck glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling in a pattern that made sense only to her. The first night after they moved in, Rachel sent me a photo. Sophie asleep under those crooked stars, one hand holding the stuffed elephant with the repaired ear. Rachel had sewn it back on in my laundry room one evening while I pretended not to watch. The caption was just one word: home. I sat with that word for a while before I answered. Daniel's world contracted slowly, the way water damage works. Quietly at first, then all at once, and the smell is everywhere. The veterans' housing subcontract was terminated. A second contractor ended their relationship with him without public explanation. The fraud investigation moved at the pace these things move, but enough information became visible that people stopped calling him back. Church relationships cooled. Preschool parents found reasons to be elsewhere at pickup time. Margaret's social standing, which she had maintained as carefully as a garden, went to seed as questions circulated about church accounts and unusual transfers. He continued, as far as I heard, to locate the fault everywhere but inward. That seemed like its own ongoing punishment. Nicole left the area not long after the banquet. I don't forgive her cleanly, but I stopped expending energy on resenting her. There's a difference between a person who does harm deliberately and a person who does harm because they made themselves convenient to someone who needed a tool. Both cause damage. Only one is actually dangerous. Rachel started looking like herself again by summer, not in any single moment, more like something that happened between 1 week and the next. She slept through nights. She laughed at things on television. She stopped monitoring her phone like it was a threat she was waiting on. One Saturday morning, I showed up at her apartment after drill weekend with coffee and food and Ava. Sophie. I kept almost calling her Ava in my head all those months. Opened the door in mismatched socks and crashed into me at knee height. Rachel was in the kitchen, smiling. Not the smile she'd been using for months, the one that existed on the surface of things. The real one, the one from before. The apartment was secondhand furniture and construction paper on the refrigerator and a small bookshelf already getting crowded. It was peace. Imperfect, slightly cramped, humidity-warped drawer peace. After everything, it looked like something rare. "You fixed the truck," Rachel said, handing me coffee. "More or less." The transmission had cost me nearly everything I'd managed to save that year. I didn't tell her how many times I'd prayed the reverse gear would hold on the way to the armory. She frowned. "You shouldn't have absorbed all of that." "It's what family does," I said. But driving home later, somewhere on the interstate with the music low and the windows cracked, I allowed myself to be honest about something I'd been navigating around. The whole thing changed me, not just Rachel. I became sharper in ways I didn't entirely choose, more cautious, less patient with the small things. There were months during all of it when I wanted consequences more than I wanted sleep, more than I wanted peace, maybe more than I wanted to be a person I recognized. That's the thing about that particular feeling: it doesn't announce itself as something dangerous. It arrives sounding like justice, like you're owed this, like watching someone suffer is a reasonable place to set up residence. Maybe sometimes it is, but staying there changes the view. A few weeks later, Rachel and I were in lawn chairs in front of her building, while Sophie chased lightning bugs across the grass in the early dark. The Ohio summer had finally done what Ohio summer sometimes does and decided to be generous. Warm air, crickets, somebody cooking somewhere nearby. Rachel looked over at me. "Do you think people like him ever actually face what they've done?" I thought about it genuinely. "Not always in the way we want them to," I said. "Some people never apologize. Some people never acknowledge the specific thing they destroyed. But people like Daniel eventually lose access to the good people in their lives, and that ends up costing them more than they expected, maybe more than they ever understand." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "I used to think leaving meant I'd lost," she said. I watched Sophie catch something in her cupped hands and then open them to let it go. "Sometimes leaving," I said, "is the first decision you make entirely for yourself." We sat with that for a while, and for the first time in a year, the silence between us didn't feel like something to fill. Later that night, Sophie fell asleep on the couch in the apartment in her old oversized socks, a faded blanket pulled up to her chin, animated voices murmuring from the television. Rachel tucked the blanket edge more carefully around her, then straightened up and looked at me. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it." I shook my head. "Stop thanking people for loving you." That made her eyes fill, but not with the old kind of tears, the kind that come when a person finally believes they're somewhere safe. If you've ever had to rebuild something after someone else dismantled it, I want you to know one thing I learned in the months that followed that rainy December night. Protecting yourself is not the same as becoming hard. You can draw a line and still be kind on your side of it. You can refuse to let someone continue to harm you and still carry love for the person you thought they were. And sometimes the bravest thing that happens is small. A woman standing up slowly in a ballroom and saying the truth in a quiet voice. A little girl in wet sneakers with blinking lights, climbing into a truck without understanding pride yet. Sometimes the moment your life actually begins is the moment you stop waiting for the wrong person to give you permission to live it.